Dr. Florence Comite, welcome to the show. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Thanks for coming out. I'm great. I'm excited to talk about all things longevity and to kind of, I guess, hone in on longevity for men, because we've done a number of podcasts as of late on hormone health in women, premenopause, perimenopause, postmenopause, and a common thread underlying all of those conversations, I would say, is increasing health span, increasing lifespan, all of those things that I want for my female listeners. But we haven't really talked about men in the context of longevity. So let's just start from a high level. What would you say is the biggest lie that we've been told about aging?
That men age well and they don't live as long as women. So why is that, right? And what are hormones in men? There's not just testosterone, but all the hormones that men have affect their health in the same way as women's hormones affect them, but uniquely male.
We're often described, though, as being far simpler than women. Would you say that that's the case?
I wouldn't say far simpler, but I do think that women are uniquely different from one another. In fact, my work started with my identical twin sister being different than me. And a smarter twin, she's a dermatologist, so she gets it right on the outside. And I'm an endocrinologist. But in men, the aging process is different. In fact, I published back in 2013 a group of 260-something men and showed that the way they age is not because their testosterone falls, which it does, but because the brain doesn't recognize that. So they age in more linear fashion than women. And we women go through perimenopause, menopause at all different ages. It can range from 38 to 58. In men, it could start in the 30s, but go to the 80s or 90s. So that's a very different picture. Men can conceive children late in life.
But sperm quality declines, does it not?
Sperm quality declines, and also the children, the offspring can have other disorders, particularly psychological disorders have been shown, like schizophrenia and others that can happen later in life with having a child.
Wow. Should men freeze their sperm? I mean, is that something that men should consider at a certain age?
It's not a bad idea because we've used that for many, many decades, right? Much, much longer than we've done freezing eggs and freezing embryos. And it's a way of maybe having better quality sperm. But think about it. There are 20 million sperm per cc or drop, and there's about 3 to 4 drops of semen that men have. That's a lot of sperm. Right? And so you can do it once or twice and you're done if you want to tap back into it. It's done frequently if you have an oncologic process like a cancer and you're going to get treated and they want to preserve function and they want to make sure the sperm are healthy and won't get damaged by the treatment, whether it's using radiation or chemotherapy.
And also cost aside, I mean, it's pretty easy to do.
Yeah, it's much less. Exactly. So in that way, maybe men are simpler in that they follow a more linear pattern than women. Women tend to be cyclical. You also don't have a handle on men aging because there is no menstrual cycle. But men have pre-andropause, periandropause, which it's been attributed to me that I coined that, and andropause. And it's about aging. It's not male menopause. It's a very different process than in women.
Is it true that testosterone levels are on the decline? And if so, what might that be attributed to?
So testosterone levels fall with age and begin to be palpably so below the surface, 1 to 3% a year, in men and women in the 30s. And the fall in men comes from the fact that they are not being stimulated effectively, meaning, I don't mean overt stimulation, but internally, there's a negative feedback loop. There's a circular kind of expression of testosterone. When your testosterone falls in your 20s, your brain says, hey, wait a minute, make more. Like they want you to keep you at an optimal level because most of us, 25 to 30 is where optimal is. If you look at athletes, if you look at any general population, and we know that, that decline begins to happen below the surface. So if you can keep the testosterone up, the production is usually fine. It's the stimulation, the brain recognizing that something's off and let's get you back up to speed. And that begins to decline in men in their 30s.
And then at a certain point, the testes just throw in the towel and they're like, well, we're past prime.
They don't altogether throw in the towel. Unlike women, where we women run out of eggs, we actually start running out of eggs the minute we're born. We use up eggs in utero. So we're born with fewer eggs at birth than we had in utero, and then that continues until we hit menopause and there's no more eggs. Men don't quite have that happen. They have cells in their testes that will be stimulated to make testosterone, but not as effectively. So first, what fails is the brain saying, not noticing that this circulating testosterone is low in the body. But then ultimately, after a time, the testes can't keep up. And so at some point, and it could be in your 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, is a dropout every decade. Like half of the men will not make sufficient testosterone, even if stimulated with peptides. I actually use peptides called human chorionic gonadotropin, or HCG, that stimulate male production of testosterone. So it's a kind of more sophisticated way than just giving a man testosterone.
Interesting. We were talking offline. You've been in the peptide game for years at this point, well before the current hype wave.
Yeah. First in children, actually, but then in women and then in men.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Is it concerning that there is so much hype regarding peptides these days?
It's very concerning. Not because peptides aren't fantastic. They are. Of course, we know the Cadillac of all peptides is GLP-1s that everyone now knows. But there are tons of peptides. They do great work. But unless you know specifically who you are, and I think of that as N of 1, that we have to know your makeup, what your needs are, what's going on at the cellular level, just taking, like a stack of peptides is not necessarily good. In fact, I was just talking recently to one of my colleagues who I work with in the financial field. Their company works with our company, and he's in a tremendous shape, around 50, can run up mountains. And he started telling me about this group of peptides he's taking, and I was, who gave you that? Recipe, because you're taking stuff you don't need to. He was taking a combination of tesmorelin, imiprelin, and BPC 157, and like, if you're taking tesmorelin, you don't need imiprelin. And if you take imiprelin, you need to take CJC 1295 because of the way they work in the system. So he eventually admitted that he did it for himself. So he said he read a lot about it. And the thing is, our bodies are so complicated and complex. So to figure out what each of us needs needs a medical background and understanding of how the body functions.
Of course. What are the earliest warning signs that somebody is aging faster than they should?
Well, not necessarily aging faster, but maybe signs that their system is slowing down. In men, erectile dysfunction is a huge indicator and usually is indicative of heart disease in the future because the pudendal arteries feed the penis to get erections, and they're a quarter of the size of the coronary arteries. So if you block them, it's very hard to get erections. And so they're a precursor to getting coronary artery disease and heart attack, which you can see in men begin in the 30s. In women, it's about a decade later. So that's one of the signs. The most pervasive sign is a lack of energy, fatigue. I just can't keep up the way I used to. And even in men, and this can range in men who do everything right, they continue into their 30s despite what life throws at them, children, aging parents, hard job, whatever. And men who sit on the couch. It's the same thing. So it's better not to sit on the couch, but aging happens regardless in every single person.
Of course. How do you know if a guy is experiencing weaker erections than they perhaps had in the past? I mean, how do you parse whether or not that's an early sign of accelerated aging or just like performance anxiety?
Okay, so let's put performance anxiety on hold for a second. But men know. You just have to ask them. And I usually divide it into 3 categories. Are you experiencing spontaneous erections when you wake up in the morning? Or at any time? Can you get an erection when you want it? Can you maintain that erection? And all of those 3 areas have different indicators, but it's actually the loss of spontaneous erections that is one of the first indicators that, your body is getting older and you don't have, either you have blockage in the pudendal arteries, just like coronary artery blockage, which leads to heart attacks, diabetes, cholesterol disorders. There's a whole array of reasons that men begin to lose their ability to maintain erections, energy, mood changes, brain fog. They describe the same thing. Men can even have hot flashes. I've met thousands in my career, and not surprised when I hear somebody say, it wakes me up in the middle of the night and I'm covered in sweat and I don't know what to do. Very similar. Hormonal changes that happen in women happen in men in a different pattern, but can be expressed the same way. So they're throwing off the covers, they're changing, they're a ball of sweat, and they don't enjoy that.
I wake up every single night in the middle of the night to pee, whether or not I've consumed any fluids in the hours prior to bedtime, like clockwork. Like I can't, it's very rare that I make it through the night without having to pee. Something wrong with me?
Maybe. It depends where you are, what decade of life. What do you eat? What do you drink at dinner? Like, do you like wine? Are you drinking any alcohol? Really stay away from it, because that's a very common, report from people who drink wine. Your sugar will go up, and in the middle of the night it could tank, and so we see that. Maybe you don't maintain enough protein for the night. Maybe you're a quick kind of metabolizer, and there are people, if you ever worn a CGM or continuous glucose monitor, so you can tell what your sugars are doing. And the sugars are indicative of where you're headed in your health in the future, your health trajectory. So that could be a reason. It could also be sleep. Your sleep patterns are such that you go to sleep, I don't know, maybe 10, 11, 12.
Yeah.
And if you're waking up like 2, 3, 4 in the morning, then it may be that you're entering light sleep and there's noise and the room isn't dark enough and cold enough, and maybe your prostate's growing a little. You look young, but prostates can start growing at any age.
Crazy.
It's like 30s, 40s, right?
I always thought it was my bladder. Like my bladder just has no respect for bedtime.
Yes, that's exactly another reason. So
and the other thing is, if there's so much as a drop of urine in my bladder, I can't go to sleep. Like I have to get up
So you
and
make
pee.
sure you're emptied out. That's a trick.
I mean, that's mainly
do.
psychological. That's just like my OCD. Like if I feel so much as a single cC of urine in my bladder, like I can't go to sleep.
So you may be tuned into your body, because as you lay flat, your body is going to circulate more fluid. You're laying flat. You're not even standing up, so blood can pool, and there will be more circulation that goes to the kidneys and the bladder, and so you're accumulating fluid, and that's probably you're sensitive to it. And so if you enter the light stage of sleep, it might trigger you to say, I have to get up and go to the bathroom.
Interesting. Okay, and on the spontaneous erection side of things, as a guy, you always hear about the phenomena referred to colloquially as morning wood. I never wake up with like an erection. Like, is that something that happens to every guy? Is there variation? Is it something
never, ever, like from the age of 13, 15, 18, 25.
Yeah, like I don't wake up with that's something that the
in the middle of the night?
First of all, I don't have, just for avoidance of doubt, I don't have erectile dysfunction. I perform pretty well in that department, but like the whole morning wood like phenomena thing, like I don't
Even waking up and you have to pee, because that can sometimes produce erections itself.
No, flaccid.
So maybe you've emptied your bladder completely at night, and then that's it.
Flaccid as a linen sheet hanging on a. Yeah, but it's interesting because that's what you hear. But aren't there tests, like tape tests or something that you can do?
You can do tests like that. More effectively would be to look at your metabolism and to look at your hormones, to see what your sugar is doing, to see what your testosterone is, to see what your insulin is. To look at patterns of cholesterol, because it may well be that it's undermining your ability to function, even though you think you're functioning just fine, because it hasn't changed much, I take it, over the years. You feel pretty much the same today as you did 10 years ago, as you did when you first started into puberty. Libido, ability to get erections, ability to maintain erections, interest in all of it, exactly the same.
Pretty much, yeah.
All right. Well, you're very unusual.
I
Never heard that story before.
Yeah, maybe so. What actually?
So I'd want to look at the data. The data would tell us all. So it's all in the data. Show me the data, basically. And then I'd be able to say, this is what's going on in your system by connecting the dots in terms of your metabolism, sexual function, cholesterol, sugar, thyroid. All of that can have bearing on why that's happening.
And what is implied when if your erections weaken due to a potential cardiovascular issue? Is that there's like actual plaque accumulating in the arteries?
Exactly, yes.
Flowing into the penis?
Yeah, not flowing into the penis, but there are arteries that feed the penis that I mentioned a little while ago called the pudendal arteries. And those arteries are necessary. If they're blocked, you're not going to get as much fluid feeding them, right? Circulation. It's what happens in diabetics. It happens in people with high cholesterol. It happens in a lot of situations. And that's a hidden message that something's going on, and you better take a look at your entire function, because disorders of aging, like heart disease, like diabetes, like cancer, all of that arises decades before you have symptoms or overt symptoms. So erectile dysfunction and lack of energy, brain fog, those kind of symptoms are very important to pick up on in your 30s so that you can avert it, reverse it, and stop it from ever happening until you're like 120.
Wow. Now, there are analogous tissues in women, but they're, I guess, not as plainly observable as compared to the penis, right? But do similar things occur in
similar things
women?
In terms of interest, libido, in terms of ability to have an orgasm, and to all different ways, but not quite the same because there's no absolute need for penetration for a woman, so you don't really need to have wood, right?
Right.
But yeah, those changes happen, and we see a lot of women with reduced libido, inability to enjoy sex. There's a lot of reasons for it and a lot of ways to tackle it, actually.
Now, what happens if you have some degree of plaque accumulation? There was a lot of talk recently. I saw a compound go viral on X. People were talking about this compound called nattokinase. Are there any compounds known to reverse plaque, assuming some has accumulated?
Well, yeah, the data in the literature, statins are miraculous in a way. They're much more direct at reducing soft plaque, which is what you want, both in the heart and elsewhere in your body, because it could affect your brain, right? It could lead to arterial sclerosis, Alzheimer's. Sugar plays a role there too, but statins, and then there's drugs like Repatha and Praluent that are also used, that are injections that have been shown to be very effective at reducing risk of those kinds of disorders. In combination, they're also synergistic. And there's supplements that can work as well. Nattokinase, I don't know as much of the literature. I haven't seen the literature saying that it would long-term outcomes or even medium-term outcomes, but it's certainly worth considering. I think in most ways it wouldn't cause any harm. At worst, it would be neutral, but I'm not sure it has a strong role in that regard. I mean, it depends. Social media, you have to take it with a lot of grains of salt.
Yeah, of course. What do you make of these? Whether these more advanced scanning modalities like full body MRIs. Now there's the Clearly scan for looking at soft plaque accumulation in arteries and whatnot.
So it's funny because I talked about all of that today with different patients. So I think full body MRIs have a role and a place. In fact, I used to do them by piecing them together when I screened people for early signs of cancer. If I saw molecules were accumulating, there were a fair number of startups I worked with prior to GRAIL. I don't know if you've heard of GRAIL, which also looks for methylated DNA, circulating DNA, so you can pick up cancer at stage 0 or 1 and hopefully cure it before it grows, right? And found a very low yield. But if there is a family history of certain cancers, particularly pancreatic, even prostate, kidney, then it's worth considering. Of course, there are ways to try to stop that from happening. So I think the scans, I think there's a company called Ezra, there's another one called Pronovo. I think there's one that's out of UK called Nex, or one of those companies. I'm not exactly sure if I got the name right there. I think it's worth considering, but here's something you need to think about. How upset are you going to be if something is picked up? What are you going to have to do about it? So you have to be prepared that if something comes up, like there's a little lesion in the lungs, or there's a problem in your prostate, all of which we've seen, or we've seen meningiomas in the brain. And some people have gone to extreme lengths to address those, sometimes even surgery. So I think you have to assume that if it's not perfect, and none of us are really perfect, what's the workup going to be? What's the investment of time and money and your fear and anxiety? So there's a trade-off. And I think we counsel each individual person uniquely to think about it depending on how they present and what they're worried about, what runs in their family, how they live life, how do they eat, how do they sleep, work out. All of that feeds. By connecting those dots, we can say, yes, the scans would be useful. Clearly is a similar scan, but it's more AI tilted, meaning that you can do a calcium score. Have you heard of that? So CT calcium and a CT angio has been around over 30 years. I started working with the folks who brought it to market at St. Francis when I was still at Yale in the 90s. And what's great about the CTA is it looks at soft plaque and it gives you a calcium score to say, what is your risk? Calcium, when it solidifies plaque, it's just an indicator of risk. You actually don't get a heart attack from the calcium part of the plaque. The soft plaque is what's dangerous, and that can accumulate over time. So knowing what's going on in your system is very vital because it helps make decisions about treatment too. Like we have people who have super high cholesterol but have Teflon arteries and don't have any sign of plaque at all. Now they might have Alzheimer's, which is related as well. So you have to look at the entire picture. What clearly does is it drills into the wall. So you can imagine if you have a wall that's blocked, you can tell that it's getting narrow, right? What you can't see, and this is what Clearly brought to the table, is that the wall can build up and you just think you're seeing an artery that's the size it should be, when really it's narrowing. And that is what Clearly brings to the table. What is the amount of plaque? Has the plaque been increased or decreased? Just today I reviewed a patient who we've been monitoring for several years, and his total soft plaque volume has decreased with treatment, while his calcium score went up, which is actually a good sign because it means he's converting soft plaque to the calcium, and that means that won't indicate a heart attack, that he won't have a heart attack from that kind of plaque.
Wow, very interesting.
It's almost what you don't think. It's figuring it out, to me, has gotten so complicated over the years. Like there's more and more information, and I feel like I don't have answers because I don't have all the questions. The human body is very complex, intriguing and complex.
Now, is it likely that, say you take a cross-section of 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds, how likely is it that you're going to find zero soft plaque? Like, is there some degree of plaque accumulation that's kind of inevitable?
Maybe, but the way it was first discovered was in Vietnam when we shipped unfortunate, men home who were only 18, 19, 20, and they found plaque already present in the arteries. But not everyone has plaque. I would say overall in my testing of men for the last 30 years and more, I would say there's probably 10 to 20% of men who have minimal or no plaque.
Wow.
Yeah.
Super interesting. I'm friends with a good friend of mine who's a very well-known functional medicine physician. He did one of these full-body MRIs, and the radiologist that read the scan flagged something that was terrifying. It was like a potential tumor in his pancreas that he then he got a second opinion, and he found that it was nothing. It was just like a false positive. But the radiologist that they had from this company was, I guess, kind of green and flagged something that sent him into a tailspin for a couple of weeks until he had the second opinion, and it was very stressful for him. It ended up being nothing, but I guess similarly, I did one of these full body MRIs, and it flagged for me. I had the nodules in my thyroid, which in 95+% of the time are completely benign, but that then necessitated an ultrasound scan, which confirmed that they were benign.
Right. Did you get a biopsy of the nodules as well?
No, I didn't get a biopsy, just an ultrasound, and they were with total certainty. It's like,
is there a family history of Hashimoto's or goiters where there's autoimmune thyroid disease in anybody? Parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, siblings?
My mom in midlife had started to develop Graves' disease, and so they knocked out her thyroid.
So that's something I would say you need to keep an eye on. It calls your attention to it. It's not problematic now, but when you hear something runs in your family, that's part of your health story. It's valuable because you know where that's coming from. In fact, I think Brian Johnson, who just discussed the fact that he has autoimmune gastritis where his stomach isn't behaving like a stomach. I know you heard of that.
Yeah.
It's like autoantibodies. He had Hashimoto's thyroiditis years ago. And while I think he holds it responsible for a decade of bad living and too much sugar, some people have a tendency to get autoimmune disease, and thyroid is one of the first places that is affected. So it's worth taking a look at, and it's worth knowing if it's in your family history. I would say 80% of the people I see have a decline in their thyroid function with age, which isn't seriously looked at all the time. There are tests that can be done called TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, and free T3 and free T4, and the combination of how they interact together can tell you what's going on and how your thyroid's behaving. Because that could be another reason for aging. When you have too low or too high a thyroid, it can undermine your brain, your heart, your muscles, your bones. In women, their menstrual cycle. And so understanding that is important. And it could mimic andropause or periandropause in men and menopause and perimenopause in women.
And a thyroid can either be overactive or underactive, and in either situation could be due to autoimmune processes.
It can. So usually what you see first, and this is the dilemma in our insurance kind of based system here, where you have a chief complaint, but they only do certain tests. So you have to request things. Is mostly a test called TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, is done. And that's the hormone that comes from the pituitary gland, or some people think of as the third eye. It's not the master gland. Actually, the master gland is the hypothalamus. And that's where GLP-1s and others, your libido, your sense of taste and smell and all of that arises. But anyway, the pituitary gland makes TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone, which tells the thyroid how to behave. It's the same thing with the testicles. So this endocrine system, which I've trained in deeply, is what causes our body and our systems to function. They're like messengers throughout the body. But you need to look at T3 and T4, free T3, free T4, which is manufactured from the thyroid. And the reason you need to look at that is your TSH could be anywhere from 0.45 in measurements to 4.5, a tenfold difference, and still be considered within the normal range, which is dangerous because you don't know what your thyroid is actually doing in response to that. The thyroid can be anywhere. So getting those 3 tests is important. But insurance technically just covers TSH. And if it's within that range, they don't do the free T3 and free T4. So that's something your listeners, both men and women, should ask for.
What are the key biomarkers that everybody should have a handle on?
So in the book, Invincible, I listed 5 through the studies I've done. So we do hundreds, if not thousands, and we follow all of this in doing a deep dive. But I think people can start on this path themselves. And the 5 key biomarkers that I've never seen optimal in anyone together is fasting sugar or glucose, fasting insulin, hemoglobin A1C, which is circulating sugar for 100 days, an average of that, cholesterol risk ratio, which is your total cholesterol divided by your good cholesterol or your HDL, high density, and free testosterone. And I'm emphasizing free because most people don't get it. They get total, and total is bound up in proteins. So it's not free to act on the body. And
that's
so you
sex hormone binding globulin, right?
Yes, that's one of the ways it's tied up. It's tied up in some other ways, but that's the major way. So you can have a very high sex steroid binding globulin, you can have a high total T, but your free T is negligible and low. And in fact, our labs are not very helpful that way because the ranges they have are in unhealthy people. They're in the normal range, but they range from before you go through puberty as a boy to very low levels because older men bring the levels down as well if you don't address it. And testosterone's one of the key factors to keep chronic disorders of aging away from you, whether it's heart disease, Alzheimer's, dementia, any kind of muscle and bone, weakness. If you get sarcopenia, loss of muscle, loss of bone, all of those rest on testosterone as well.
And what if there's discordance? What if you have high total testosterone, but your free testosterone is not as high as you would expect?
It's the free testosterone that tells the story, and that's pretty common and can be from a number of reasons. You could have taken medication that prescribed or not prescribed, that causes your liver to rev up, and so you metabolize testosterone, you have more a binding globulin, and you don't have enough free. So we measure what we do based on having free testosterone. And men in their 20s when they're at their peak health. So again, 25 to 30 is really where you want your body to be biologically speaking, and when it comes to any of these variables. So those 5 biomarkers can tell you so much about yourself.
What are the environmental factors that might impact testosterone negatively?
So too much drink, not enough sleep, fatigue. You're not getting quality sleep. Forget about the amount of sleep, but you really need the deep sleep and the restorative sleep or REM sleep. All of that can affect it. Anxiety, stress. There's lots of cortisol. So there's a lot of reasons. Going to bed and eating right before you go to bed changes the way you release hormones, including growth hormone. And so testosterone can be affected by any one of those reasons.
What about heat on the landing gear?
Absolutely. So there's
like
a famous
keeping your cell
Seinfeld.
phone close to your pockets, saunas and whatnot.
Going to saunas, hot tub. You probably remember George on Seinfeld. Retraction,
Yes.
Right? They're not that small. This shrinkage.
It's a thing.
Yeah, it is a thing, and it's not healthy actually for sperm. So men who are thinking of fathering children shouldn't really be sitting in a hot tub frequently because it will undermine function of the testes. You can usually recover, and you can tell by getting a semen analysis how well your testes are functioning and what your semen looks like. Do you have enough sperm? Are they moving in the right direction? What's the shape of them? All of that, which we test frequently, particularly when I see younger men in their 20s and 30s who are dealing with issues that involve testosterone. And before I'll treat them, I'll want to establish what their baseline functioning is. So they have to have a semen analysis in order to do that.
At what age should a guy get the dreaded digital prostate exam?
Some guys never want to have it, but it's probably
I don't ever want to have
in your 30s.
In your 30s?
Yeah, it's not as bad as you think. First of all, PSAs can tell you a lot, but not all. And even when you do a digital exam, you're not feeling the front of it because it's right up against the colon. So you can't really feel that, or rectum. And so, but having an exam means if there's any lumps or bumps, you're going to pick that up. That's important to pick up.
Is that what a physician is feeling for, lumps
Yes.
or bumps?
Yep. Changes in the size and the depth and how it feels in terms of the shape.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you said starting in your 30s and then subsequently every decade?
It should be every year.
Every year?
Every year. You want to see, men don't go to doctors that frequently until something bad happens. After college, I think it's unusual. A lot of times men show up with a heart attack or with diabetes or with a stroke. And that takes too long. In contrast to women, we women usually see a gynecologist. We're kind of programmed every year to get a pelvic exam. Men are not. And so I think there are worried well, which I think led to this industry of how do I keep myself healthy too? What is longevity? And they will get checked out and they will follow biomarkers, but understanding what those are doing to your body is what's missing in today's environment. So we have a lot of information, but who's connecting the dots? Who's interpreting it? Who's taking that knowledge and turning it into wisdom? That's what's kind of missing in our world right now.
It's so true. What do they say about, I don't want to spread misinformation, but they say that like if you, a lot of men end up dying with prostate cancer of other things because it's so slow moving?
Yes. So a lot of cancers grow and develop, just like almost every disease of aging, over years. You don't wake up one day with a heart attack. You've been brewing it. You don't wake up with diabetes or dementia. It's happening, right? So the prostate, and the reason that's said, just like breast cancer in women, is that it could be slow growing. And so, yes, you might die at 85 of a heart attack or 90, but your prostate may have a lot of abnormal cells. So think of aging as also producing the turnover of cells are not as healthy as they were in your 20s. And that's because your system is declining and your immune system is beginning to fail. And there's a whole bunch of studies on that now going on about what actually happens with the immune cells and what can we do to protect ourselves.
Very interesting. Colonoscopy, when is that supposed to happen?
So ideally at 45, they've actually lowered the age. It used to be 50, but if there's any hint of it in your family, then you want to get it earlier. And so you can start even in your 30s. We have some people where we pick up certain syndromes in their family. There's breast cancer, there's colon cancer, there's pancreatic cancer. And so we discover patterns of genetic findings, some things called Czech syndrome or Lynch syndrome. And we follow people religiously so they get a colonoscopy every other year, sometimes every year. And then there are certain disorders that increase the production of polyps in your gut, and those polyps can turn abnormal. My family has a high incidence of colon cancer. I make sure everybody's taking a low-dose aspirin because there's data that shows in women and in men that if you take a low-dose aspirin, you reduce your risk of midline cancers, including colon cancer, pancreatic cancer, prostate cancer, by a significant amount. You have to be on that aspirin for several years.
Wow.
And that's data. That's based on data. That's publications.
That's interesting. And midline cancers, meaning cancers of
like cancers that run midline.
Wow, I've never heard
Stomach,
that.
colon, yeah. In fact, women on birth control pills is another just interesting fact, actually reduce their risk of cancers, except for cervical cancers, almost all other cancers of the reproductive system. So while birth control pills are not ideal to stay on for a very long period of time, that's one of the bonuses if you are. It also can increase your risk of osteoporosis because you're reducing the circulating hormones. Usually birth control pills have far less hormone than women themselves who would just cycle regularly. Their hormones go up and down, and their average level of hormones are higher than what's in birth control pills.
You talk a lot about the difference between chronological age and biological age. Is there a convincing way these days to measure biological age?
I think there are trends that you can follow. I've been doing it for years, both myself and family and all our patients. If you look at, for example, rate of aging, there's a test called Dun and Pace. Well, it started with Stephen Horvath in California, who was very interested, also an identical twin. His twin was a psychiatrist, but he was into genetics. But that was really measuring DNA that had to do with chronological aging. So chronological aging, just to define it, is every year you're blowing out a candle, right? And that's great. You want to live long, right? But you also want to stay healthy. So my investment in the work I did was about Healthspan. How do I maintain someone's health for life? And if they don't age, therefore they won't get sick. Because to me, most diseases were caused by aging, the majority of diseases. Biological age is how old are your cells? What are your cells doing? And cells in your lung can be different than cells in your brain, cells in your gut. There's a lot of similarities and things we have to look at, but we don't know all the answers yet. But there's a lot of companies developing. There's one I've used for years and worked pretty closely with that look at different ages of every organ system. They also can look at genetic changes to see if intermittent fasting works for you. There are people where intermittent fasting is great. You can fast all day and not worry. There are other people who would be dangerous to fast, or they get their sugars too low and it's bad for the heart and the brain. That's actually a bad sign also. Too high sugar, too low sugar, not a good thing. You want to be in the sweet spot. So biological age is a way of handling your body saying, listen, I'm doing everything I can to keep myself as healthy as possible. And slowing biological age, which is another measure called Dun and Pace, will give you the rate of aging. So let's say every year you blow out a candle, it's literally a year to year, right? With Dun and Pace, if it's less than 1, if it's, let's say, 0.9, 0.7, which we've seen many patients achieve, then you're aging slower. Your biological age is going slower. You're not as old as the number of candles you're blowing out.
And how's that measured? You take 2 time points and you measure something?
We measure them at baseline before we start any interventions. And then as we start the process and interventions, we'll usually measure it every 6 months to a year. It depends on the human being. It depends what we're looking for. And it depends on if a person wants to know those facts, because most of the science that we're looking at that has to do with longevity is just beginning to accumulate. I feel lucky because I designed a way to look at people prospectively, knowing as a scientist, as an academician, trained in investigation, that no one would believe me if I would just say, do this and do that because I've seen it work. That's called anecdotal information. What you really want is factual information that you derive from data. Now, you don't always get all the answers. A lot of times, though, that data is skewed. Think about it. Most people who look at their biological age are invested in their biological age. Therefore, they're going to look better than your average population, creating what you see in lab tests, like in Quest and LabCorp, right? Get 1,000 people from across the country or even 1 million. That's going to look very different than a group invested in their health like you are.
Yeah,
like
healthy user bias.
Exactly. So you have to keep that in mind. So if you score pretty well and you want to get better, keep in mind that you're up against people who are invested in trying to keep their health for life.
I also think it's important. I don't know. You got me thinking about how one's needs might change over time. Like I used to be a big intermittent faster. I used to push my first meal of the day until noon, 1 p.m. And I feel like at a certain point, I would start getting migraines when I skipped meals. So now, like meal regularity is like pretty important for me. I don't always get a migraine when I skip a meal, but like I just hate having migraines.
Can I ask you a few questions about
sure.
your family? Any diabetes in your family? Any heart disease? Mother, father, are they all alive? How young are they?
Well, my mom had very poor health, and she had dementia at a young age, and she passed due to pancreatic cancer. And
how young was she when dementia was diagnosed?
58 when she first started having symptoms. And before that, some years before that, the Graves situation.
Right.
And then a couple of years before that, she had some suspected viral thing that led to she was on like carvedilol, like some cardiovascular medication for some time. I think her heart actually recovered, but she had like this Graves thing, so she was on Thyroid for many years, and then at around the age of 58.
And is it run in the family, like her parents, aunts, uncles, any?
No, and that's become the basis of my work is that, her mother, my maternal grandma, lived until 96, and she was very healthy. She had those sturdy Ashkenazi genes, but my mom got the she was very unlucky health-wise.
Yeah, well, you don't know what she was exposed to. I don't obviously know enough. How about your father? How
My
well is he?
dad drinks, smokes. He's still kicking, doing well, cognitively
In
intact.
what age bracket?
He's in his late 70s at this
So
point.
you've inherited kind of mixed genes, which is great. You definitely have longevity in your genes, right?
I hope. Knock on wood. I mean,
Right.
I look like my mom.
Right.
I look most like my mom. My two brothers look like my dad.
Looking externally doesn't mean what you are functioning like internally. Getting that internal data, looking at least those 5 biomarkers, and you may have a lot more biomarkers where we could tell what is actually brewing. There are also genetic tests for Alzheimer's. So there are types of Alzheimer's, not just measuring ApoE4, but there are a lot of genetic variants. Have you ever had your ApoE tested?
Yeah.
Are you 2, 3, or 4?
I'm a 3-4.
So that 4 incurs risk for you. It increases the odds ratio of getting Alzheimer's, but they're actually genes that further define it because it's not as common, but 4 is an indicator. The fact that no one else had Alzheimer's is a good sign, but it also means that you want to look at your lipids, you want to look at your sugar, you want to look at the reason you want to look at your sugar too is what you told me about intermittent fasting. You probably go too low. You probably burn at a high metabolic rate, and therefore you're burning through food. Like for me, I can go all day and fast, and I'll get a headache maybe at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I don't even think about it. I can get tons of blood drawn, and as long as I drink some fluids, I feel fine. And there are genes that dictate can you fast or not and what happens. But I have other patients who can't fast at all, and if we try to have them fast overnight, we better do the test very early in the morning so they can get their blood sugar up. So if you've never tried a continuous glucose monitor, you want to do that because it probably correlates with your sugar falling into a good range or maybe too low. You don't want that with your risk of an ApoE4.
Yeah.
And I don't know what your cholesterol is like, or obviously I'm speaking with very little data, but just giving you a hint of what it means to look at the whole picture, to connect the dots and figure out what are the insights and what can we do to stop it and reverse it.
Yeah. No, it's so interesting. And I don't eat a low carbohydrate diet anymore. I mean, I think there was a period where I was, but I eat plenty of carbohydrates. And I think I've found purely N of 1, this is totally an anecdote, but I found that like eating higher carb actually, like I feel great typically. But yeah, if I'm like stressed out, going from point A to point B, haven't taken a moment to feed myself over the span of a day, yeah, like by the end of the day, I'm starting to feel like
so I would definitely encourage you to try the CGMs because I think you'd learn a tremendous amount about why you feel the way you feel. And sometimes it's a huge surprise. I also saw you shopping, and I want to tell you how much I love Honeycrisp apples. They're my favorite in the whole world.
They're the GOAT. They're the
best. My God, yeah. Even though they have varieties of them now where they're calling them, it's crisp in their name, but I still have
Crisp.
There's others, and I still find the Honeycrisp are the best,
They're
right?
the best.
So I agree with you. I think eating whole food, I don't necessarily think a total plant diet is like the way to live for most people. We've done studies in it, and we've had 2 very unhealthy people trying to be healthy on only plants. Very hard to get enough protein, very hard to put on muscle, feel good. In fact, migraines, insomnia, you name it. Those were issues that changed once a person changed their diet. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to be a carnivore, but you should have sources of protein that allow you to build muscle and keep your strength because the muscle is an organ of longevity.
Crucially important.
Yeah.
What is it? What's your diet and approach to these various wellness modalities, even exercise? What does that look like for you?
So that's a great question because I used to think of in this order that it was food, exercise, sleep. And I quickly reversed that over the years as I started collecting data and realized that sleep trumps everything. Next is food. And last is exercise. So I tell people when they travel and they say, oh, I'm so proud of myself. I only got 4 hours, but I made myself wake up early and go to the gym. And I'm like, no, sleep is the new exercise. Don't wake up early to go to the gym. You're undermining yourself because it changes the way you eat, the way you think, the way you feel, your sugars, your lipids.
You
actually secrete too few quality hours of deep sleep and total hours, which you want to look at least 6 to 8. Some people sleep longer, and sometimes it's because they don't get quality sleep and they feel tired. So first of all, with food, I try to keep it simple. I've been allergic to the word diet because I think everyone, like thinks they have found the right diet. I just tell people to eat using a Mediterranean kind of guidelines, right? A lot of plant, a lot of vegetables, but you want to have your protein, whether it's fish, meat, chicken, turkey, right?
Amen.
And you want to start eating with protein, fat, and fiber. So by doing that, you're changing the way you secrete sugar and insulin that follows. And you actually modify the release so you don't become insulin resistant. So you can simply change how you're eating by doing that. Exercise resistance leads the pack, particularly as you hit your 30s and 40s. You want to do at least 50% resistance, maybe 50% aerobic. Lean into resistance to build the muscle and to build your strength. Also, high intensity interval training. Break out in that sprint when you're, trotting along or walking a dog or, whatever makes you run up a few stairs, right? And then I spoke about sleep already. So I think one of the tricks with sleep is to keeping the room cold. And the other trick is not to eat for a couple hours before you go to sleep, because that changes the way you sleep and changes the hormones that you secrete.
Very interesting. What are some, everybody now seems to be talking about longevity. Are there any fads, any myths in the longevity colloquial discourse that you wish would just die?
There's a lot of myths that are out there. I think because there's a steep learning curve and people aren't sure what's the right way to live and what the choices they make. And part of that comes from the fact that each one of us is different, or as I mentioned, the N of one. That even my identical twin and I, which was one of the epiphanies I had after looking at the data and understanding it, we don't express the same genes in the same way, yet we were born with identical genes. So you don't necessarily change genes, but you can change the expression of genes. It's also never too early and never too late, really. We put on muscle on people and have them change with exercise alone, and there are a lot of studies in that, even in their 90s. So that you don't give up if you're starting along this path and you're wondering what you should do. As far as a myth, I don't think it's simple. And I think that people are trying to define it simply. And with all the AI out there, you get answers to your questions, but it's gathering up every bit of data around the world. And some of it's good data and some of it's bad data. So how do you apply it to yourself? I think that's the key. What you're doing for yourself, and start decades before you start aging. If you know what runs in your family, like in your family, begin to look at the triggers for maybe dementia, for cancer. So you're doing that right, but you need to know about yourself. So I think it starts with know thyself more than anything else, as you described yourself and why you don't intermittently fast anymore, and why I can still fast and feel fine and maintain muscle.
Well, I would say one perception that I would love your take on is that this endeavor, this pursuit of longevity or an expanded health span is a costly one, that it's expensive. What do you make of that?
That's why I wrote the book, because years ago when I started this work, I knew that to figure it out, people had to pay their way through it because no insurance company covers it. We have a reactive healthcare system, not a proactive system. Not even, prevention is one thing, but to me being proactive means you're going to explore what's going on way before you feel sick. Why not? Don't you want to keep your health and run around? So for me, it was never about saying you're going to live longer. It was about how do you keep your health? My dad asked me when I graduated medical school, tell me how to stay healthy. And because he was a health nut, and he's the one that sort of encouraged this. And I looked at him like cross-eyed, like, no, we don't learn that in med school. We learn about disease and how to treat disease, because you usually show up with a chief complaint. Or as I said before, men get a heart attack, and that's when they're in the emergency room. 80% of diabetics are diagnosed in an emergency room because they get sick, and it's hard for a diabetic to feel better quickly when you get a virus or a bug. So I wrote the book because I want people to own their own health destiny, to take this advice, to get those 5 biomarkers to start, and to begin to peel away what are the layers? How do you change your future health trajectory to keep yourself strong and vital to the last possible moment, whether it's 100, 120, 150. I have no way to look into the future, but the crystal ball I carry is looking at that data and telling people, here are some examples, here's what you need to do, and this is where you need to head.
Now, if you were to look into the future 10 years, what do you think, what do you anticipate looking back and some of the current ways in which we practice medicine, this endeavor, this longevity endeavor, this pursuit? Are there any ways in which we're doing things today currently that you think 10 years from now we'll look back and say that was crazy?
I mainly think waiting for disease is crazy. But if you talk to conventional medical doctors, and I'm a card-carrying member of the academic community. I was trained at the best institutions between Yale and the National Institutes of Health. I couldn't have had more serious training. So I know how we think. Unfortunately, we're not training people to be proactive. That's what I believe we need to insert into the healthcare system. We need to own that health destiny ourselves, and we need to put it into practice. Not crazy. Like, I don't believe in deprivation. I like ice cream. My sugar stays fine with ice cream, right? It goes up with a banana. So learning about yourself is really key to figuring out where we're going to go in the future and where you'll go in the future. 10 years from now, I think we'll take it for granted that some of this data will be automatically collected from the time we're little kids. It'll be fed into some machine, whether it's an AI type of machine or just a collection of data based on what's been collected around the world. And we'll be able to look at trends and what people are actually, what works and what doesn't work. And I think that's poorly understood now. I think it's something that's just growing, just beginning to grow.
Does AI excite you? I mean, it must seem
tremendously.
Remarkable to you.
Yes, and remarkable. And I use it to some extent, but I know when it's hallucinating. I know when, to me, it's the next step after Watson. Do you remember Watson?
Yeah.
Where it was garbage in, garbage out, because they went to the library, they got all the books, they were all old, as opposed to everything glowing on the internet. The problem with AI is that right now it doesn't discern what's good information and what's bad information either. So you're left with, what do I do? I remember starting around 20, 30 years ago, when people would come in and they'd be overwhelmed because they'd do a search and find 25,000 reasons you can have heart failure, and then start worrying about it, as opposed to prior to that, they couldn't get that information. Unless they were a journalist and they can go to the library, right, a medical library. And the same problem today. I think there's a lot more fear, a lot more worry. That's not going to help us. So figuring out ways to stay in the present moment, to have relationships, to figure out ways to find joy in life while you're sorting out what works for you and what doesn't, because you may be completely different than your best friend for sure, and probably even your sibling if you have a brother, because you're living life differently. Just like identical twins are never going to be in the same spot at the same time doing exactly the same thing once they separate in utero.
Is your identical twin also in medicine?
Yes, she's a dermatologist. There are about 5 doctors in my family.
Wow.
Most of them are dermatologists or plastic surgeons. So I'm the real doctor. So I get to talk to everybody about what they're dealing with. So it's interesting.
That is so interesting.
Yeah, and it translates. For example, I knew I had a gene called MTHFR that made it difficult for me to do something called methylating B vitamins. So I wasn't absorbing B vitamins. They weren't available to me. So I know I have 2 sons. One's a doctor, one's a lawyer. Did that pretty well. It's my father who encouraged them. I thought one was going to be a drummer and the other was going to be a photographer, because that's what they told me. And he said, no, they need a degree. So that's what they ended up doing. And so I knew they inherited at least one of those genes. And it turns out their father was what we call heterozygote. So I'm dipping into genetics, meaning he had one good gene and one variant gene. And so they had a chance, 50-50 chance of either getting the 2 genes like me, being homozygote, or being heterozygote and getting 1 gene. And because of that, starting very young, I made sure they got methylated B vitamins to avoid issues that we can run into. Like in my case, I lost my hearing after a viral attack over 20 years ago now, and I don't want that to happen to anyone else. So being cognizant of that means I can search for it in my patients and also in my family.
So what do you do to counteract that gene mutation? Do you take like a methylated B complex
B.
every day?
So instead of like a lot of times, particularly in this part of the world, in the LA, you get B12 shots or B12 infusions. If it's not methylated, you're not going to get the active stuff. So since it's a pretty widespread gene variant, it's about 24% of us have that gene variant, it would be important to find out how low your B. You can just measure Bs or take Bs. Take methylated Bs, because that will ensure that you're getting the active ingredient. You don't have to convert it. There are some foods that have methylated B in it, like eggs and some steak and other foods, but not a lot. So you want to make sure that you protect yourself with folate, B12, riboflavin, those 3 in particular.
And and like if you look on most drugstore brands of multivitamins, you'll see cyanocobalamin, which is the synthetic vitamin B12, and then you'll see folic acid, which is the synthetic folate, right?
Yes, so you want to make sure it says methylated next to it. So infusions you can take all you want, but if you have those genes, you're not going to convert them even if they're infused directly into your body.
You didn't mention homocysteine as one of the labs. Is that
so? Homocysteine is tied to that gene. So what you find is that your homocysteine goes up. Your homocysteine should be less than 8. And so if your homocysteine is higher than 8 and you have low B12 and folate, it's very likely you have that gene. So we lower homocysteine directly when we start treating people if we see that's an issue. Plus, if we improve metabolism, you're going to burn at a hotter rate. It's like an athlete. So we get ahead of it and make sure people are taking adequate B vitamins, which is kind of easy to take because you can't overdose on it. You'll just pee it out. You know, your urine might not smell so nice because bees can smell pretty intense. But,
oh yeah, I started taking 400 milligrams of riboflavin because there's some evidence suggesting that it can help prevent migraines, which is a B vitamin. It's vitamin B2, if I'm not mistaken. What about as a longevity expert? You know, in the longevity space, people are always talking about grip strength as being a surrogate indicator of vigor, robustness.
I think it is, but I think you have to put it in perspective. So, for example, my twin sister has amazing grip strength. She's a gardener. I kill plants. So we're very different that way. We have different taste buds. Like she can live on squash and other foods and makes great food, but the seeds bother me. I buy European cucumbers because I don't love the taste of seeds. We have different experiences with texture. I can live on fish, sushi, and sashimi. She never eats fish. So my mercury was sky high at one point and hers was low. So I think that, remind me of the question again?
The grip strength, yeah.
She has great grip strength because of the gardening. I have very poor grip strength. And so I'm working on it, but I don't think, and maybe it's me deluding myself, but I don't think any one factor. I think it's what we think of as multifactorial. All of us are complex, and there are different issues that balance, and we have to look at it that way. So while I work on my grip strength, my sister works on other issues that she has to deal with. For example, I've been on testosterone for over 30 years because I knew osteoporosis was very prevalent in my family. I had an aunt on my mother's side, her sister, an aunt on my father's side, his sister. Both of them, osteoporosis contributed to their death. So I knew at a relatively young age, 30 years ago, that I wanted to protect my bones. And testosterone has a much more powerful impact on bones. Men have more of it, so they don't start losing bone like we women do. We start about 10 years before men. Heart disease, 10 years in men before women because of the balance of hormones. Estrogen is great for the heart. Men don't have as much. Testosterone is great for bones. Women don't have as much, but we have a lot. So I don't have osteoporosis. My sister does. She started about half the time she's been on it, and so she probably lost bone more over a period of time, and right now she has bone loss, and we're going to have to correct it. I don't. So I think working on aspects of what you need to do, whether it's grip strength or your bones, is what is defined by the N of 1. Like what is important for you? You mentioned a few things, and I think you already know because you pay attention to some of it, and you're obsessive, as you mentioned.
Yeah,
so,
very much.
As I am.
Very much so. But this is something counterintuitive. So women should ask their doctors about their testosterone levels. I mean, men are all kind of thinking because it's, you know, right. It's so tied into masculinity,
yes.
You know, their testosterone levels, that number, that lab. But like women, I feel like is probably something not many are talking about.
Well, and it's a sad thing because we women have more circulating testosterone in our bodies than estrogen. Estrogen goes up and down while we're reproductive age. So we make eggs, we ovulate. But testosterone's a steady state. By the time we hit our 30s, we're losing it. And we have less than 1/10 of what men have, even less. And I see it very low in most women. And so maintaining it is important, but here's the rub. It isn't approved in America. So you have to be able to order it, as most doctors can, despite the fact that there's no FDA approval. But if a doctor feels it's indicated, you can say that in the record and you can say, this is why I'm using it. So we're careful. We look at risk-benefit for each person. For example, women who have breast cancer, who don't want to be on estrogen, they sometimes don't feel so well. They don't even want to live, and they've been fired from jobs. And this I started many years ago, where I would give them testosterone to support them, and it turned around their life because they wouldn't be able to use estrogen because they were afraid of it. Now, it's not that estrogen causes breast cancer, but there's fear that estrogen could cause breast cancer.
Wow. Well, this was such an illuminating conversation. Thank you for coming out. Thank you for writing Invincible. Super excited for my listeners to get their hands on.
Yeah, that's why I hope it will help everybody define what's necessary. Go with that information to your doctor. Say, these are the kinds of things I learned. Buy a book, which would be great, for your doctor, because I wrote the book with evidence and with references. So it has a scientific basis for why I think the way I do and what I created.
We love it. Data over dogma. We love scientific evidence. We love empowering patients, listeners, anybody basically. Like, I mean, it's not just you don't want to wait until you become a patient to empower yourself with information.
In fact, saying the word patient alone makes you feel like there must be something wrong with you.
Yeah.
So for a while I would use the word client. But in some ways I feel like with all the social media and what's out there, that defining what we do from a medical point of view is important to lend weight to it and to make sure that it's based on real science as opposed to this is popular or that's popular or maxing out on fiber or maxing out on protein, where there isn't any balance. And I think it's hard to decide what's right for you without balance.
Yeah, so true. Well, I've got one last question for you, but before we get to that, where can people pick up your book? Where can they find you on social media? Drop the handles.
At Dr. Dr. Florence Comite on Instagram and Facebook, as well as Florence Comite on LinkedIn. Our website is Comite MD, www.comitemd. The book can be found everywhere books are sold. I like to support independent bookstores, but Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, all of them are great. And I'm very excited because many, many years ago when I first had the several epiphanies that brought me to do this work as a scientist and a clinician, I wanted it for everybody. But I felt like I had to prove the model and I had to make sure that it worked. And as a result, the findings came out of that proof and that science so that people can take it and apply it for themselves.
God bless. Last question that gets asked everybody on the show. What does living a genius life mean to you, Dr. Comite?
Living a genius life, that's a great question. I think it's complex, life itself. I think you have to decide for yourself what you use when you need to be creative, how you live life. Try to find balance, although it's not easy. I find that to be very difficult, being so caught up in my work. So genius is when you leave life, you've had joy in your life, you've had vitality, you've lived life to the fullest, whether it's taking quiet moments when you want to be alone and you want to kind of grow, or being with friends and laughing and enjoying life. That to me is a genius life.
I love it. I love what you said about balance too. Makes a lot of sense. Well, thank you for coming out.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.
Thank you guys for listening. Share this episode with friends and loved ones that you think may benefit from it. Sending love. Hope you guys are enjoying your summer, and I will catch you all in the next episode. Peace. Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.